Good day, everyone. We are reviewing Wetzel's Limnology textbook, edition number 4, and we're in chapter 6, which deals with light in inland waters, and more specifically, we are working on subchapter focused on light attenuation in the water column, and today we'll be looking at seasonal and long-term patterns in light attenuation. Light attenuation can vary substantially over days to seasons. Many lakes exhibit clear seasonal patterns in light attenuation that correspond with variation in the concentration of dominant optically active substances. In lakes where algal biomass is high and CDOM is low, the seasonal dynamics of algal biomass regulate the seasonality of light attenuation. Many lakes exhibit a springtime clear water phase, which corresponds to a decrease in UV and PAR-KD. The clear water phase typically follows spring algal bloom when there is a rapid decline in algal biomass associated with increased zooplankton grazing. So let's look at figure 6-13. Typical seasonality in water quality in temperate lakes where light attenuation is frequently dominated by algal biomass in green or chromophoric dissolved organic matter in brown. On the x-axis we have month, and on the y-axis we have the Zecchi depth in meter. And Zecchi depth is the depth of a disk that is lowered in the water column at which the disk is not seen anymore by the observer above the water surface. So what we see here is, the y-axis, the depth increases as you go up the y-axis, right? So for the lakes where algal biomass is dominating, we see a decrease in the Zecchi depth starting like early June, with a minima probably around September, October, where it is the inverse for lakes that are dominated by organic matter. We see an increase in Zecchi depth from May through like about September, at which point it starts to decrease again. In more eutrophic waters bodies, light attenuation is typically high. For example, water quality is low. During warm summer months, following the clear water phase due to conditions that favor algal blooms. In contrast to eutrophic lakes where CDOM is the dominant optically active substance regulating underwater UV and PAR, tend to exhibit a parabolic seasonal pattern in light attenuation with peak water quality, lowest KD, often corresponding to peak incident light exposure and stratification strength. Initially, light attenuation is highest in early spring due to limited photobleaching, deep mixing, and often substantial allochthonous DOM inputs with snow melts where that occurs. Seasonal decreases in light attenuation are associated with seasonality in photobleaching and density stratification, and seasonality is greater in shorter wavelength UV relative to PAR. When stratification begins to break down in the fall, deeper water with higher absorbance are entrained into sunlit surface water, and KD increases as a result. Separately, disturbance events such as severe storm can severely reduce water clarity, but these effects are often temporary. Long-term observation of light attenuation and water quality reveal complex and diverse trends that vary among lakes and regions. In lakes of the upper Midwest of the United States, about 10% of lakes have exhibited significant decadal scale trends in light attenuation with about equal numbers of increases and decreases. In other regions, such as throughout part of the Northeast United States and Northwest Europe, light attenuation has mostly increased due to CDOM increases associated with recovery from acidification. Similarly, many studied lakes in China have increased in light attenuation associated with an increase in eutrophication. Overall trends in light attenuation and water clarity reflect corresponding changes in the concentration of optically active substances, which respond to both local and regional drivers, including land use, land cover, and climate, measuring light attenuation and water quality. As discussed above, empirical estimation of KD often relies on measurements of light at multiple depths in the water column. A submersible radiometer is commonly used to measure light underwater. Radiometers often vary in their spectral sensitivity. When measuring light attenuation, a second above surface radiometer, Wetzel, is often used to correct for change in incident above surface light that could otherwise impact the estimation of KD. Often, several other terms are used to describe light attenuation, including water clarity and transparency. Water clarity and transparency are often used interchangeably and inversely with light attenuation. An approximate evaluation of the transparency of water to light was devised by Pietro Angelo Zecchi, pronounced Secchi, in the mid-1800s, now termed the Secchi depth. This method continued to be widely employed due to its simplicity and long historical record. The Zecchi disk depth is the mean depth of the point where a weighted disk, typically white or divided white and black, and 20 centimeters in diameter, disappears when viewed from the shaded side of a vessel, and that point where it reappears upon raising it after it has been lowered beyond visibility. Zecchi disk depth range from a few centimeters in turbid reservoirs to over 30 meters in ultra-oligotrophic lakes such as Crater Lakes in Oregon. So this is the Zecchi depth in action, and it's lowered into Crater Lake in Oregon, next to U.S. National Park Service research vessel. Crater Lake is one of the clearest lakes in the world, with Zecchi disk depth regularly exceeding 30 meters. So that means that this disk here that you can see here, that is getting lowered with a cable, can be seen underwater 30 meters from the surface. The Zecchi disk depth is essentially a function of the contrast related to the reflection of light from its surface versus the background, and is therefore influenced by the absorption and scattering characteristic of the water and substances in it. Both theoretical analysis and a large number of empirical observations have shown that Zecchi disk depth measurements are more sensitive to variation in the suspended particles than dissolved substances. This correlation is particularly true in very productive lakes, and in a very generalized way has been used to estimate the approximate density of phytoplankton populations. However, where even moderate amount of dissolved substances or non-algal particles are present, attempts to estimate algal biomass for trophic state classification from Zecchi depth data are often inappropriate. An approximate relationship exists between Zecchi disk depth, ZSD in meters, and PAR-KD in per meter, in meter to the minus 1. KD is equal to 1.7 divided by ZSD. However, variations in the relative concentration of dissolved and particulate substances can influence this relationship, with coefficient up to 3.8 reported for stained water bodies, where CDOM regulates light attenuation, and as low as 0.5 for highly turbid systems. Thus, while the Zecchi disk depth typically corresponds to about 10% of surface PAR, this percentage can be as low as 3.6% in stained lakes or as high as 22% in turbid water bodies. Although the Zecchi disk depth is independent of surface light intensity to a significant extent, results become erratic near dawn and dusk, and the Zecchi disk should be used preferably at midday. Ecological role of solar radiation. The amount and quality of underwater light is a master variable controlling many aspects of aquatic ecosystem. In most lakes, underwater light is controlled by both incident solar radiation and the concentration and spectral properties of optically active substances in water. In many smaller water bodies, adjacent canopy cover regulates light exposure. In turn, light regulates numerous aspects of water temperature and stratification, ecosystem productivity, and organism behavior, carbon cycling, contaminant toxicity, and overall economic valuation of water quality. Light and thermal structure. The amount of incident light and underwater light attenuation together regulate numerous physical processes in aquatic ecosystems, such as heat transfer and the depth and strength of thermal stratification, especially in smaller lakes. In surface water, heat absorbed is redistributed by wind-induced mixing, and this process interacts with KD to determine the depth of stratification. Small lakes that are wind-sheltered tend to have very shallow mixed layers and thermal profiles that mirror the exponential decrease in solar energy input with depth. Lakes with a high PAR-KD tend to have warmer surface waters relative to lakes with higher water quality. For example, light-absorbing algal blooms can amplify surface temperatures by up to 1.5 degrees centigrade relative to nearby water bodies without blooms. The effect of changing water quality are most pronounced when PAR-KD is below 0.5. However, in some circumstances, surface water temperature in low-clarity lakes may not be amplified over higher clarity lakes because greater heat absorption in darker waters can be offset by greater outward heat fluxes, thus increases in KD, i.e. clarity losses, may increase surface temperature during warming periods, for example, the spring to early summer, but also facilitate more rapid heat losses during cooling periods. In general, the effects of KD on deep water temperature are often far greater than on surface water temperatures. Lakes with a higher KD, low clarity, typically have colder deep waters, volumetrically average lower water temperatures, and stronger and shallower stratification relative to lakes with a low KD. Overall water clarity losses, for example, due to increases in algal biomass or DOM, can suppress climate warming impacts on lake temperatures, leading to net cooling despite rising air temperatures. Light and aquatic food webs. Solar radiation is the major energy source driving the productivity of aquatic ecosystem, and light often limits their productivity. Algae and macrophages use between 4 and 9 quanta of light energy per molecule of CO2 reduced. Even in nutrient-poor aquatic ecosystem, total productivity is frequently light limited. Light frequently limits benthic primary production with corresponding reductions in invertebrates and fish. However, higher light exposure does not necessarily equate with greater productivity, as photoinhibition can occur when photosynthesizers are exposed to excess PAR and UV light. In analysis of over more than 900 days of lake metabolism data from surface mixed layers, 43% had moderate to strongly light-saturated primary production during midday summer conditions, and photoinhibition occurred on 77% of these days. Habitat within aquatic ecosystem are determined in part by the amount of light they receive. The euphotic zone is determined by the vertical range over which daily photosynthesis exceeds autotrophic respiration. The extent of the littoral zone is also commonly defined as the depth over which attached algae and plants can photosynthesize. Many lakes exhibit a subsurface peak in algal biomass termed a deep chlorophyll maximum, or DCM, which often occurs when the PAR-Z 1% exceeds the depth of the surface mixed layer. The depth of this DCM often corresponds closely with the PAR-Z 1% depth. A common perception is that a DCM is primarily a feature of oligotrophic lakes. However, deep is a term relative to the thermocline, and thermoclines can be very shallow in small water bodies with high CDOM. For example, Hummingbird Bog is a highly stained and wind-sheltered small pond in northern Michigan, with a DOC concentration often over 20 milligrams per liter. It had a thermocline of 0.6 meters deep, a PAR-KD of 4.4, a Z1% of 1.1 meter, and a DCM peak at 1.3 meter deep. Exclusion of productivity measurements from sunlit deep sources, whether from a DCM or benthic habitats, may substantially underestimate whole ecosystem productivity. So let's look at figure 6-15 here, which is the relationship between the depth of the deep chlorophyll maximum, or DCM, and photosynthetically active radiation, PAR-Z 1% depth across 47 lakes. So on the x-axis we have PAR-Z 1%, and then on the y-axis we have the deep chlorophyll maximum in meters. So as the PAR-Z 1% increases, we have related a deep chlorophyll maximum increase, which makes sense because as we are going deeper in these lakes, when there is high productivity from a chlorophyllc perspective, there's also a high value for PAR Z1%. In addition to supporting photosynthesis, light impacts aquatic organisms in a number of other ways. For example, solar UV radiation is mutagenic and carcinogenic and can kill sensitive organisms in under a single summer day of exposure in clear surface waters. The true primary mechanism of UV-induced damage are direct absorption and the production of reactive oxygen species. DNA strongly absorb UV wavelength and exposure and can create pyrimidine dimers, DNA lesions formed from thymine or cytosine bases. UV damage typically increases exponentially with decreasing wavelength, but since there are few photons underwater at very short wavelengths, between 200 and 310 nanometers, peak UV-induced damage usually occurs at longer wavelengths, at UVB to about 320 nanometers. However, solar UV exposure can also be beneficial to organisms. For example, vitamin D photosynthesis requires exposure to UVB radiation, and longer wavelength UVA or visible light can be used by some organisms to repair DNA damage using the photolysis enzyme. Organisms have evolved a number of mechanisms to deal with damaging UV exposure, including the synthesis of sequestration of photoproductive compounds such as carotenoids, mycosporin like amino acids, and melanin. Other mechanisms include behavioral adaptation to avoid high UV environment and mechanisms to repair UV-induced damage. For example, Daphnia use light as a cue in body orientation while swimming. Zooplankton species include many in the genus Daphnia exhibit daily migration through the water column downward during the day and upward at night in response to changing light cues. In low water clarity water bodies, these daily migrations are often associated with avoidance of visually predating fish, whereas in high water quality water bodies, these migrations are associated with avoidance of UV exposure. Daphnia in particular can detect and are negatively phototactic, swim away from, to UV wavelength. In contrast, some zooplankton, including some calinoid copepod species, are positively phototactic or attracted to UV radiation. Some larval fish also have the ability to detect and avoid UV radiation and may use UV to increase prey capture. More generally, water clarity impacts fisheries productivity and species interaction. High UV can exclude some invasive fish species from otherwise suitable habitats, and some species exhibit preferences for specific thermo-optical habitat. Many lakes experience seasonal ice cover. Snow on ice severely reduces underwater light and can have profound effects on the whole ecosystem metabolism. In more productive lakes, the loss of light under ice together with the consumption of dissolved oxygen by the catabolic process can exceed production by photosynthesis, leading to severe seasonal reduction in dissolved oxygen or even total anoxia. Seasonal oxygen reduction or anoxia often leads to the death of many organisms. When fish die under this condition, this phenomenon is termed winter kill. Additionally, the patchiness in light beneath the ice, snow, cover can in turn influence the horizontal distribution of algal photosynthesis and the behavior of planktonic animals.